And we're off. Right, evening everybody. It is Friday, the 4th of November. Hello dog, what do you want? Yes, I know, you've had a walk. I've been for a walk and it's bloody cold outside and it's a Friday. So do you know how we're going to see the weekend in? With 3 whiskies tonight. And the reason I'm doing 3 is... Right, easy with your tail. Get on your bed, you noisy bugger. The reason I'm doing 3 tonight is because I'm doing Speyside alphabetically, and it just so happens that the 3 C's that I'm going to do tonight are incredibly rare, like ridiculously so. And I think it would be really good to do all 3 of them in one go, not in the same glass, because that would be daft, but just to do one after the other as a sort of little mini run of closed distilleries that you're not going to find again at all. So the first one is this one, which is Caperdonich, and it was very, very kindly donated amongst a whole heap of other ones that he donated by Andrew A.P. Butler. So Andrew, thank you very much for this. And he's donated another one of the 3, which is the 3rd of the 3, which is even more special and rare than this one. So Caperdonich is here, or was here. It was founded in 1898 by J&J Grant, who were the founders of Glen Grant Distillery, and it was actually called Glen Grant No. 2. Like, they really thought hard and went, what are we going to call it? Oh, No. 2. And the aim basically was to mimic Glen Grant, to just have a second distillery that was making pretty much exactly the same whiskey. Now, if you've watched a few of my other Speyside whiskey reviews, you'll know that 1900s, sort of late 1800s, kind of 1890, well, about 1898 pretty much, to 1905, Scotch whiskey generally just went, it was a disaster. There was recession, there was a market crash, there was something called the Patterson crisis, which, if you've not seen any of the other videos, was essentially a couple of guys that were the brothers that had rags to riches to rags story. So they had a successful whiskey business, everything was on credit, they were living the life of Riley, credit came back, and they couldn't afford anything, and it went down to fraud and all sorts. It was an absolute nightmare, and it killed a lot of the industry. And around 1900s, the turn of the century, quite a few distilleries closed down, and a lot were really, really struggling, of which this was one, Glen Grant No. 2. And it turned out that because they tried to mimic the original Glen Grant so much, they actually were able to use the equipment from Glen Grant No. 2 like as spares. The stills were the same shape, the equipment was pretty much all the same, so they were just shipping it across to the Glen Grant distillery and going, right, well, has that run out? Oh, well, we'll just replace it with that one. So it sat there dormant for 60 odd years, 1965. It was then bought by Glenlivet Distilleries Limited, who couldn't name it Glen Grant No. 2 because the law had already been passed that you weren't allowed to name distilleries the same name as other distilleries nearby. So you weren't allowed to have like another something Glenlivet, or you weren't allowed to call it Glen Grant No. 2. So they called it Caperdonich, which means secret well. That's where the name comes from. And because this was the 60s and technology had obviously improved since 1900, they were able to essentially rebuild the distillery and rebuild the equipment within inside to such an efficient extent that you only needed 2 people to run the distillery at any one time. It was that efficient. They weren't doing everything. I don't think they were doing floor maltings. But it was essentially, you only needed 2 people to run it, and the rest of it did it itself. So in 1977, Seagram's bought the distillery and did a bit of work on it, did a bit of expansion. Now Seagram's was then bought by Pernod Ricard as part of the kind of breakup of Seagram's. Some of it went to Diageo and some of it went to Pernod Ricard, and Pernod Ricard essentially picked up a lot of Seagram's whiskey business, and they took Altavane, which we did recently, Brave Ale, which I did day before yesterday, and Ben Riach. And they had Caperdonich as well. So they acquired those distilleries in 2001. 2002, Caperdonich shuts and has never opened, and is highly unlikely to ever reopen. The building is there, but I don't think the equipment is. I think everything's been dismantled. Now, Altavane still going because we did that the other day. Brave Ale is still going just about to some extent because it's being used in blends. Benriach was bought. Caperdonich is the only one that's not been reopened in some form or another, which suggests that it probably never will. So it's I'm extremely lucky to have this one. So this is the miniature which Andrew's put the label on, but this is what the bottle looks like. And this was actually a bottling by Berry Brothers and Rudd, who are a very, very highly regarded wine and spirits merchant who picked a particular cask, and according to this, it's cask reference 121125. It was distilled in 1992 and bottled in 2012, so it's a 20-year-old. It's 46%. I don't know exactly how many bottles there were because it's a single cask, but it's not going to be a huge amount. And I've lost my jigger. My jigger's over there. Bear with me a second. I'm not sure if this cable's going to stretch either. But it's you're looking at Master Malt have got it listed at 79 quid. But it's out of stock, so that's how much they were selling it for. I have seen it sold at an auction site for 100 quid. But Caperdonich is pretty highly regarded, so I'm surprised it's not more than that. And it is a ex-bourbon cask, apparently. So if I can get this, I'm not going to have to use my teeth, fortunately. Now, I have had a Caperdonich once before, and it was about a 30-year-old. I think it was a Douglas Lang bottling when I was working at the whisky shop. I was very, very, very lucky to have that. And I can remember vaguely, because my memory's pretty shocking anyway, I can remember it being absolutely mind-blowingly good, but like 250 quid a bottle. So I knew that I would never have anything similar to that again, he says. But I am quite looking forward to this because this does have a very good reputation. Now, what's going to be interesting, and the reason I wanted to do all three of these together, and hopefully you'll watch all three of them as well as I go through them, is this a case of it's shut, it's no longer available anymore, and it's old? You know, this shut in 2001. The other two that I'm going to hit were actually shut in the same year, 1985. So it's old, it's rare, it's closed. You're not going to get any of it more. Does that mean it's a special? Does that mean it's a good whiskey? Not special whiskey, because obviously it's special because it's rare. There's you know, they're not making it anymore. But what I've got to look at is what the whiskey's like in the glass, and not try and get prejudged preconceptions because of the story behind it and the rarity of it, because the price is expensive and it's going to go up. I can tell you that in the next two. And the danger is that you go, oh wow, this is really rare. Oh, you know, you can't get these three anymore, and they're old and they're really expensive and all this lot. Oh, they're going to be absolutely amazing. They might not be. That's the thing. That's what I'm not hoping that they're not going to be any good. I'm hoping they're going to be absolutely brilliant, like I am with every whiskey that I've had so far. Not all of them have been. But just because it's old, just because it's being closed down, has it been closed down for a reason? Is it the fact that they closed it because of all the distilleries that they've got, it turns out that those ones aren't doing as good product as the other ones are? So we'll shut those ones because they're not actually as good as the ones that we'll keep open. We'll see. You know, reading some of the reviews of like closed distilleries and things like that from retailers and also blogs and things like that, there does seem a little bit of hyperbole in terms of, oh, well, it's been shut for 20 years and this is a 30-year-old and oh, aren't we lucky to have it? Oh, it's absolutely amazing. Not many of them turn around and go, do you know what? It's a bit of a shame, but it's not that good really. So we'll see. I'm hoping all three of them are amazing, but I don't know if they will be. But I'm not going to say they're amazing just because they're shut and they're rare and hard to get hold of and expensive, because it doesn't work like that. Although some people would have, you know, particularly marketeers and people that probably have been given it for free and are being told, can you promote this for us because we need to sell it? Those people will say, oh, it's amazing. Oh, you know, oh, isn't it fantastic? But it might not be. You just never know. So no chill filtration and no colouring added to this at all. And for an ex-bourbon cask, now I don't know whether it's like a refill or maybe first fill or second fill bourbon, but for a 20-year-old, I suppose it has been diluted down to 42%, but it's lighter than I would have expected. It is kind of it is white wine colour, but there's almost a very, very slight greeny tinge to it. Not obvious, but there's something else there that's just, it's kind of like golden, but there's a slightly very, very, very pale green tinge to it. Still a nice colour though. Ooh, that's interesting on the nose. That's sugary. That's sugared almonds on that. That's tickling my nose as well. It's my old man's nose hairs. Yeah, sugared almonds. You know that light sugariness that you get with sugared almonds, where it's a sort of sweet, almost milkiness to it. Yeah, very slightly floral, sort of kind of honeysuckle on it as well. Very delicate. It's nice, very nice, but so delicate, like jasmine in there as well. It's very much a kind of spring garden. Gonna sound a bit poncy now, but almost after a light shower, where everything's kind of all the aromas are kind of heightened, and all that floral sweetness is kind of hanging in the air. It's a lovely nose though, liking that. Now the sugar almond texture's there, but it's not as floral, and it's slightly woody. Not off-puttingly so, but it's not quite as delicate and floral as I was hoping it was going to be from the nose. There's a little bit more bite to it. There's a bit more of an oak influence, and it's not a bourbony whiskey character or fruitiness. This is more of an oak caskiness to it, but it's not overpowering. It's just, it kind of caught me off guard a little bit, because I think I was hoping that it was going to go down that floral, slightly sweet route. The sugared almond flavour is there, but it's not as prominent as it was on the nose. There's no jasmine, honeysuckle. There's no spring garden after a light rain. But it's it's a bit more whiskey-ish and less kind of delicate and spring-like. Definitely there on the nose. It's a lovely, soft, light, prancing spring lamb of a nose. But on the palate, it starts off with that sweetness, but as you start to bring it to the back of your mouth to swallow it, it becomes a little bit drier and a little bit oakier. Second sip wasn't quite as woody, maybe because I was aware of it a little bit more. So it's kind of sweetened a little bit. It's nice, it's eminently drinkable, and it is a sweet whiskey, and it's definitely a kind of spring summer whiskey after a light meal, maybe. You know, you could get away with this as after dinner, but I'm talking like post salmon and salad or something like that. Certainly not a heavy meal. It's nice. It is really, really good. I'm liking it. It's just not quite giving what it's teasing you on the nose, and it's such a shame. If the palate was like the nose, it would have been freaking awesome. It would have been up there with Belgian Owl and that type of spring-like, delicate, sweet whiskey. It's just a little bit too woody. Whether it's slightly overaged, whether it's spent very slightly too long in cask, and it's just started to pick up a little bit too much of a woody character to it. Not by much, don't get me wrong. Is it worth £100? To be honest, I think it probably is, considering the provenance of it, considering the rarity of it, considering where we are with the distillery itself, the actual quality of the whiskey. It is a very, very good whiskey indeed. I don't think you're going to be disappointed by it. The woodiness kind of, the more I can taste it, and the finish is pretty good actually. It's still going now. The oakiness actually works with the whiskey. It doesn't overpower it. It doesn't taste like I've got a miniature that's been sat for 20 years and has got, has kind of like been, what's the word I'm looking for? Turned, with the air. That's not the word I'm looking for, but it's the nearest I can get to. But it's not like it's been sort of kind of like slightly turned and it's actually too much of a woody character. It actually works with the rest of the whiskey. It's not really where I want the whiskey to go quite. It's just taken a little bit of a diversion that I'd rather have not gone down that road. I'd rather have carried on where you were leading me, you little tease you. But all in all, that's nice. That's really nice. There's a lovely sweetness to it, and I love that sugared almond character. That's really, really nice indeed. Andrew, thank you very much. I shall do a little rinse out and then we shall go on to very rare whiskey number 2. So I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.